She asked if you want to roll.
Yeah. We'll bring this revenue committee to order. Donna, you want to call the roll?
Roll call for Senate revenues. Senator Case,
Present.
Senator French.
Here.
Senator Ide,
Here.
Senator Pappas,
Here.
Chairman McEwen.
Here.
All present, Mr. Chairman.
We're going to start out with House Bill 279, property tax exemptions, order of application. Do we have anybody from the House here to carry this? Well, we'll bring up the department then.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. This is a very simple bill, House Bill 279, but it's a very necessary bill. And the reason I say that is, you may recall 2024, seems like a long, long time ago, but there were multiple property tax relief measures that went through the legislature and were passed. All of them going down the path of being standalone bills, correct? But when we get to the end, now you've got multiple bills that have to be implemented. Now, when you look at each of the bills, and I'll go over them, but the first thing I want to do is explain that all of the bills that were passed last year all have specific language that says that the exemption shall be applied to the assessed value. Assessed value is defined in Title 39, Chapter 11, as taxable value. And then when you go to the definitions of taxable value means the percent of fair market value of property in a particular class as follows. So that is simply fair market value times the level of assessment is your assessed value. So when county assessors are charged with applying all of these exemptions, let's just talk about the first one, House Bill 45 from 2024. That's the 4% cap on the residential structure. It also included, and that applied in 24, then we also include the improved residential land for 25. But that bill makes a calculation of take the prior year's assessed value, multiply that times 1.04, and any assessed value in excess is exempt from property taxation. So if it's applicable on a property, that exemption exists. Then you've got the House Bill 3, which was your long-term homeowners exemption. It also states that it would be the exemption is 50% of the assessed value, which is defined as taxable value. What does that do? It means I've got a 4% cap and an exemption that I've applied to assessed value. Now I've got a 50% exemption that I'm to apply to assessed value, but I've already exempted a portion of that assessed value with a cap. So now we go to the bill and you'll look at page 2. The first guidance it gives assessors is that when there's, for any property, and this is at the top of page 2, where more than one exemption applies under this subsection, and this subsection is 3911-105, the exemption shall be applied in the manner determined by the Department of Revenue in accordance with the following. So the first little I on line 6 says, if the exemption is to a portion of the assessed value of the property, the exemption shall be applied in sequence so that the subsequent exemptions are applied to the net value after the initial exemption. So Romanet 2 on line 12 says exemptions based on percentage, such as House Bill 45, which was a 4% cap, and the long-term homeowners, which is a 50% exemption, shall be applied in the order of the smallest percentage to the largest percentage. So if no other bills passed in 2025, we already have the situation that assessors needed to know. Do I apply the 4% cap and then apply the 50% long-term homeowners to the net after the 4% cap? Or am I supposed to go back to assessed value and apply 50% to that, which basically ends up being where you're exempting the same assessed value multiple times. And that, we don't believe, was the intent of the legislature. And so the other piece of this is Romanet number 3, exemptions not based on a percentage of property value shall be applied after the exemptions based on a percentage. What is that pertinent to? Veterans exemption. So if you have a property in 2025, and I'm not talking about any other legislation that the body's looking at today, but just based on what passed in 2024, you could have a 4% cap, the long-term homeowners, and the $6,000 assessed dollars for the veterans exemption. This bill ensures uniformity. The math is being done in the same manner in all 23 counties, and it's clear to the taxpayer that they are not going to get an exemption that is applied to assessed value multiple times to get a net assessed value exemption. So with that, you'll find that this bill did not have any amendments on the House side. This bill was drafted in conjunction with Legislative Service Office to ensure that we were covering, even if we had additional exemptions, even if this body passed another exemption, whether, 25%. Let's just say, for example, Senate File 54 had passed last year. This would have clarified that we would have done the 4%, the 25% Senate File 54, the long-term homeowners exemption of 50%, that each one of those steps, we would apply the next percentage to the net. And I hope, Mr. Chairman, like I said, it's a fairly simple concept. Rather than having to address this math in every tax relief measure that you consider, it was just easier to put it in one statute as a catch-all in Title 39 that gave guidance regardless of what this body passed. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, run that example again on the long-term homeowners exemption of 50% and the 4% cap. So a person has a property and it's assessed at whatever, $1 million.
Okay.
So there's a 4%, everybody's eligible for that 4%, can't go over 4%, right? And then that person can also apply for, if they meet the criteria for the long term, they can apply for the 50%. So they're eligible for both, correct? Because everybody's eligible for the 4% cap. And then, as like you say, these others, the veterans and the long term and anything else that may come down the line this year.
Mr. Chairman, Senator French. So we'll start with the example of the 4% cap. So the exemption is only applied if the value of the property exceeds 4% above the prior year's assessed value, okay? So there were many property owners that did not receive any exemption for the 4% cap. But for the sake of the example, let's say they did. Let's say that when the assessor appraised the value at fair market value and applied 9.5%, then if the 4% cap was in place, and let's say we exempted $1,000 in assessed value based on the cap. Without this piece of legislation, if they qualify for the long-term homeowners exemption, the statute currently requires that the assessor put 50% applied to that starting point again. Well, I've already exempted $1,000 assessed value based on the 4% cap. Now the law requires that the assessor put 50% on that original value. So you're exempting it twice. And so the key is with this bill is it clearly states that we apply the 4% cap first. We end up with, let's say, $90,000 of assessed value because we've exempted $1,000. Now I apply the 50% to that net to arrive at what the exemption amount is for the long-term homeowners. Is that help?
Yeah.
Follow
Follow
up.
up,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, thank you. Director, so The 4% only applies if your assessed value goes up, way up. If it, a lot of people maybe their assessed value doesn't go up, but maybe 1%, 2%. It's just, there's that cap there. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, and if I may, just for clarification, dealing with the legislation that you've got currently that you're considering. One thing on the 4% cap, just to be knowledgeable about, is should the piece of legislation that changes the level of assessment from 9.5 to 8.3 or whatever percentage, keep in mind that that cap is applied to assessed value. That's what the statute reads. So even if your market value goes up, but your level of assessment has gone down, those property owners may not see an increase in assessed value. The calculation is going to be last year's assessed value, which was 9.5% of fair market value, compared to the 2025 assessed value that might be 8.3%. So we may see fewer exemptions related to the 4% cap simply because the level of assessment has been reduced.
Any other questions? Do we have anybody in the audience that would like to speak on this? Do we have Dixie Huxtable waiting to come on?
We do have Ms. Huxtable. I'll admit her.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Afternoon, how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for allowing me to do this remotely. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor. Don't really have anything to add to what the great director just provided for you. She spelled it out very well. We totally support this bill. We need this to be able to ensure that we can administer these exemptions across the state uniformly. There are a lot of moving parts with all of these exemptions, as she explained, and this just gives us one level of consistency that we know was in the law. So we certainly do appreciate your support of this and would stand for any questions.
Questions? Well, thank you for your testimony.
You.
No more public comment? We will close public comment.
Move the bill.
Sensing that you're ready for the question.
Almost, Mr. Chairman. I was hoping that we might be able to get kind of a worksheet or an example, an illustration that we can use and hand out to our senators on the floor that might have the way that different exemptions would be applied. And maybe something was already done for the other body, but that would be helpful to us, I think, in precedent, because I think I'm on this bill. Quite a few Pappas is on this bill, but I would have a hard time explaining it as well as you just did on the floor. So I'd appreciate a little handout or something. We can talk later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments? Donna, you want to call the roll?
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 279, property tax exemptions, order of application. Senator Case?
Aye.
Senator French?
Aye.
Senator Ide?
Aye.
Senator Pappas?
Aye.
Chairman McEwen?
Aye.
We have 5 aye, Mr. Chairman.
Well, 279 has passed the committee. Next order of business will be 165. Ranked choice voting prohibition. Representative Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. I haven't met some of you, so my name is Joe Webb. I represent House District 19, and I appreciate you taking the time to hear this bill in your committee today. Ranked choice voting, House Bill 165, ranked choice voting prohibition and ranked choice voting itself is a system that allows voters to be able to rank their choice of their candidates in order from high to low. And a lot of times we go 1 to 10, or if there happens to be 10 candidates. Over the years, we as voters have been required to be able to make a choice, unless we chose not to vote for a candidate at all, of which candidate we liked. Sometimes we refer to the candidates as the lesser of two evils, but we've basically been made to make that choice, unless we chose not to vote at all, like I said. With ranked choice voting, if one of the candidates does not receive a majority of the number of votes, the second, third, or even fourth place candidate votes are then added to the first place votes of the candidates until one of them wins a majority. Because of this, ranked choice voting can lead to candidates that are of lower rating being elected to office. Currently, Maine and Alaska allow ranked choice voting in statewide elections. There's some questions. I know I've seen several things with at least Alaska having some serious questions after adopting such a law. I also believe that there are 5 states that allow municipal elections to use the ranked choice voting in the US, and 10 states have banned ranked choice voting altogether. 3 of those states include, well, the one to the northwest of us, the one to the north of us, and the one to the northeast of us. The bill itself is pretty simple and straightforward, and because of that, I'll go ahead and read it, and you can follow along there. It's, Statute 22-117 says, "Nothing in this election code shall be deemed to authorize any election in Wyoming to be conducted through ranked choice voting. Any existing or future ordinance enacted or adopted by a county, municipality, or other governmental entity that purports to authorize ranked choice voting in violation of this subsection is void. As used in this subsection, ranked choice voting means a voting method that allows voters to rank candidates for an office in order of preference, and has ballots cast to be tabulated in multiple rounds following the elimination of the candidate until the candidate or candidates with the most votes are declared winners, or any other system that allows a voter to vote for more than one, or vote for more than the number of candidates permitted to fill a particular office." The only other change that is made is in Statute 22-6-120. We've added the words in there, "shall be printed, vote for one," or if the office is, and then it adds to be filled by more than one candidate, "shall be printed, vote for not more than one," like we currently have. So it's further directions and clarification for the voter. I bring this bill forward now because I think it's better to act proactively than reactively. And with that, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, I've heard of ranked choice voting, but I'm not exactly sure how it works. So if you have, help me, 10 people run for an office, and the people go, I assume that's in the primary, is that correct?
Can be, yes.
So they go to vote, and then they have to rank all 10 from 1 through 10. They say, I like this person the best and this one the least. Then is there another election held to, how do they reduce that down to one, a winner? That's where I'm a little confused on how that works.
Go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, no, there is only one election. And what it does is if the person that gets the top amount of votes does not receive 50% of the vote, then they take the lowest one and he drops out. They take that lowest number or that lowest person's second votes and add them to the voters across, the first 9. Right, and then the same thing happens with the, if they still don't, if in that second round, they don't get somebody with 50%, then the third, or the next person drops off, and those third place votes then come up and count. Does that help clarify that? It is a little confusing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So you literally could have number 5 on the list of 10 end up elected because of the process.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct, and that's the thing that at least I personally am trying to alleviate, those lesser, sometimes it can even give an advantage to a candidate that may be less preferred by the body as a whole, but they end up getting more votes.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Webb, good to see you here today. So I'm a little bit confused on, as it progresses up and say the bottom candidate, got 10 votes. So there's 10 candidates and he got 10 votes. And so you've got 9 left. How does his 10 votes get dispersed to the other 9 candidates? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Representative Webb.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that bottom one drops off, and we'll just use 10 again as the number. The votes that the voters have actually voted for, the other 9 individuals are then applied to the votes that those individual voters or candidates received, in the first round. Okay, and then the same thing happens. If in the second round, nobody receives a majority of the votes, then in the third round, that candidate with the least amount of votes drops out, and his votes that were received for, or that were given for the remaining candidates, then they are added. So you have, if I can put it succinctly, if you had 3 rounds, you would have candidate number whatever could have votes from round number 1, round number 2, and round number 3 that each individual voter had voted for them in that order.
I think the question was more, just a minute, was more to the effect of if you had the 10 votes left, do those get applied evenly amongst the 9? Or does number 1 get more and number 5 get less? Or is there an equation for how the lowest votes get divvied out?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding of that is that if you had 10 voters, and they had voted for 3 of the candidates, that the voters' candidates are then applied to each, or the voters' votes are applied to each candidate depending on how they rank them, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th. So, and I know it's kind of hard to follow a little bit there.
I understand this, but Senator Pappas?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Clarify it.
I think it's a little different than what you're saying. To me, because when you vote, you don't rank them. You're just voting for a person. Okay? The way I've seen it done in the past. And what happens is when you drop that last person off, then that number of votes those votes don't get applied to anybody. The number of votes just drops off. So the total number of people that vote changes. So that percentage for the first voter will go higher. And you keep dropping it off because the number of eligible votes then changes. So the percentage of the person who has the higher vote keeps going up and up and up until they hit 50%, depending on how many they drop off. That's my understanding. I don't think, and I could be wrong, somebody could correct me, I don't think they take any votes from the people that are dropped off and try to apply them to somebody. Those votes are Once, on ranked choice voting, once you've decided that you're gonna have to drop somebody out, those votes are no longer there.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is what bothers me about this bill a little bit. We don't even know what we're banning. I think a better name for this kind of voting is called instant runoff. And it is a type of preference selection that's been studied in a branch of economics called public choice literature. And it's used in lots and lots and lots of different ways. And if you think about it as an instant runoff, it's a little bit better way to think about it. So you do, there is a ranking of your preferences. I vote for McEwen first, Ide second, and Pappas third, for example.
Wow, you got that
It
right.
could be, but when, the idea is that the people say, well, if my first choice isn't available, here's what my second choice would be. And so if your first choice ends up getting eliminated because they don't have enough votes, they're at the bottom of the deal, then you just look at what they said their second choice would be and compare their votes with everybody else's first choice. It's not really, I think it's been mischaracterized here. And it works really well. It is, people that have experience with it find it easier to do than to explain, and they actually like it. And what it does tend to do, Mr. Chairman, is to hone in on the candidate that pleases the majority of people in a way that's aligns ourselves with what we expect an election to do. We'd like to have people in office that represent a majority of people. And so I'm appalled kind of by the discussion so far, and that we would in a reactionary way, eliminate something we don't even know what we're talking about and prohibit from being used for like municipalities or other people that might want to do it. It's not authorized under Wyoming law for like any type of races, but why would we prohibit it? And why would we prohibit it for municipalities? We had a bill to authorize it for municipalities before. This one just escapes me why we have to be so afraid of even learning about something that we can't even explain. And even the sponsor can't explain what he's doing.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pappas.
To Senator Case's comments, I'm not so sure I'm thrilled about ranked choice voting anyhow to begin with, but why we would want to take that away from local control. I can see if we want as a state to say, no, that's fine for us. But why we would want to take it away, an option away from our counties and municipalities and anyone else, I think it's up to those elected bodies to decide whether they want to do it or not. I just think it's another attempt at the state trying to whittle away local control.
Senator Ide.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would disagree with the last two speakers, essentially. I mean, it appears to me ranked choice voting makes it, so somebody with not any real support can actually move up the food chain on the election. And it is complicated. It's a system that is too complicated for anybody to really understand, really, without going to ranked choice voting school. So, and I think it opens up the door for voter fraud on this thing too. So I'm all in favor of the bill. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments?
Can I make a comment, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
As far as why we would do it is, I believe it's just for uniformity throughout the state. I understand where you're coming from with that, but to keep all of our elections the same through the state would be the reasoning why.
Okay, thank you. Will you hang out for a few minutes with us?
Sure.
Do we have anybody in the audience that wants to speak to this? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Joe Rubino. I'm the Policy Director and Counsel with the Secretary of State's Office. We're in a couple of meetings during this session, and so I appreciate you taking the time. I just wanted to say a few remarks that we said on the House side that Secretary Gray does stand in full support of this bill. We've had a lot of discussions, and the Secretary has been very vocal about ranked choice voting, which he believes is both confusing and specific to this bill, really a proactive measure to take a firm policy stance against ranked choice voting as an appropriate step and necessary to the welfare of elections in our state. I want to give a little bit of background, and we've had a couple of discussions with different ones. I know it was brought up, the municipalities ranked choice voting, which was a 2023 session bill, which we spoke on extensively. And Representative Webb did a very good job of explaining or trying to explain what ranked choice voting is. And I think the confusing nature of ranked choice voting, which is part of the impetus for this bill. Ranked choice voting is a system in which voters rank candidates on their ballots. They do rank them on their ballots. If no candidate attains more than 50% of the first choice vote, then the candidate with the fewest first choice votes is disqualified. The votes are tabulated again, and their voter's second choice picks up those votes. The process continues without another round of elections until one candidate receives a majority of the vote. There have been a number of bills instituting both policies that institute pilot programs with ranked choice voting that have been rejected in a number of states. And then what you also see is states taking proactive action to prevent ranked choice voting, or to take a firm policy stance that says that no ranked choice voting elections will be allowed in their states. There's a couple of things that the Secretary has previously spoken to concerning ballot exhaustion, which is unique to ranked choice voting. It does not occur in, say, for example, runoff elections where the candidate, those votes are dropped off, and the second place vote for those candidates' voters, meaning the last place candidates' voters, would then be inserted into the election. This phenomenon called ballot exhaustion is unique to ranked choice voting, and it leads to one round of voting, but then multiple rounds of counting in which different outcomes may result from comparison to a standard election in which you're counting the results on their face value. I think there's a number of states that we have previously pointed to with concerns with ranked choice voting. A New York mayoral race in 2021 resulted in confusion with the tabulation of those ballots. It actually took a number of weeks for the ballots to be tabulated, for their election administrators to do that. And so we're thankful, the Secretary is thankful that Representative Webb brought this bill to take an affirmative policy stance in Wyoming. I will note that I think, in our office's review, this language is largely modeled after Florida's ban on ranked choice voting, which they currently have. And there are a number of other states, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, that have also taken affirmative action in banning ranked choice voting. So I'm happy to take any questions. I do think Representative Webb did a good job of explaining it. And it's hard to explain by its nature. It is confusing. So thank you.
Questions? Well, thank you for your testimony. Who wants to be next?
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee. I'm Gail Simmons with Civics 307 and Why Vote. I'm on and against, but not for the, probably for the reason you think. I do not believe that ranked choice voting is appropriate for Wyoming, and I'll go into why. It is in use in Alaska, and they successfully defended an attempt to repeal that in 2024. So this is something that has been successful in another state. RCV, which is what ranked choice voting is shortened to, is actually very common in our personal lives. Every time you make a decision through the process of elimination, you are mimicking the underlying theory. So you go into you want to buy a car, you go into the car dealership, you've got kind of like, well, this is what I want best, but if I can't have that, then I'll take number 2, and if I can't have that, I'll take number 3. And so you go in, you can't have, they don't have number 1, so you end up buying number 2. You're still happy with it because it's a car that you wanted, even though you would have preferred a different one, it's still the one that you want. Also known as instant runoff, Mr. Chairman, as Senator Case identified, the process acts as a forcing mechanism for results by majority rather than plurality. Ironically, we just heard earlier this day that this is the stated purpose of House Bill 249 runoff elections. So we have kind of like two different approaches, one that says, oh, pluralities are fine, and another one that says, no, we have to have majorities. This is only a factor when there are more than 2 candidates for a single seat. In the 2024 primary, only 3 Republican Senate races out of 15 and 6 Republican House races out of 63 had 3 or more candidates. So in other words, RCV has no purpose, has no impact. It's like any other voting, unless you have more than 2 candidates for a single seat. There were 0 in the general election, by the way. Much more common, actually, are uncontested races. In the primary, there were 4 House Republican and 17 Senate races that were uncontested. And in the general election, Mr. Chairman, 13 of 15 were uncontested for Senate districts and 48 of 63 in House districts. So the primary purpose for putting in a ranked choice voting is if you're in a locality or in a race or in a state where you have lots of people running for a limited number of seats. So it actually encourages kind of putting forth the candidate who has the broadest base of support. And I think that's probably the most common reason for advocating for RCV. So there is no point in making major changes to our elections for only 6% of legislative races alone. Implementing RCV would require software updates to the tabulators, again, because as the identification is you're not throwing out votes, you're going back to votes where the first person was dropped off, and you go back and you count them again. So a computer can do it really, really well once the software is created for that. That is not currently an available option. So under our ES&S and the software that we have on our equipment, they don't have an option to do ranked choice voting in that equipment. As a result, when we have, with the exception of special districts, all elections in the state are administered by the county clerks using existing election processes and equipment. The bottom line is this: RCV cannot be implemented in Wyoming on elections administered by the clerks unless the legislature passes a bill to do so. This bill proposes to have the legislature prohibit a voting process that does not and cannot exist for county, state, and federal elections without the legislature taking action anyway. The bill serves no purpose. And I think, Mr. Chairman, that's kind of what I heard Senator Case talking about. You can pass it, but like I said, it serves no purpose because you can't do it unless you guys take proactive action to take it. So there's no loss by not passing this, because until there is software options available for ranked choice voting in our existing equipment and tabulators, there's no point in anybody even offering up RCV as an option. And with that, I stand for questions.
Questions? Senator Ide.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, you talked about the number of races that were just, 2 contestants, some 3. I know of one right here in Laramie that had 6. And, I don't think it really amounts to how many people are in the race or the percentage of the ones that are over 2 people in the race. And some of your other comments, it sounds like, you're relying on a lot of computer programming if you go to ranked choice voting. And I don't think that's something we want to do. We're putting more nefarious, computers counting our votes. So I think it's good to ban this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
actually, Senator Ide, that was exactly my point. It would take software, and the software is not available. So we can't implement it in any kind of proper fashion currently, which is what my point was, that we're banning something that you would have to take action to put into place, and it would make no sense for you to do so.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, so Ms. Simmons, help me with the municipal part of this. This language says, line 2, page 2, any election in Wyoming. So I can envision the town of Hudson wanting to conduct its municipal election, and they could do it by hand, possibly. I realize that I don't think that's authorized in Wyoming, but this would ban that. Now, what would be wrong if the town of Hudson wanted to do it by hand?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
Senator Case, in any municipality where they have elected not to go through the county clerks, I think that is a problem, and it's back down to home rule. We only need consistency in elections for offices that are statewide. What is done in Hudson and what's done in Claremont, there's no reason that those would have to be consistent. It's completely different areas. So that is the one downside. So removing that possibility from special elections and municipal, I think, are the two that could do that. Again, why they would want to go to that trouble, given that I don't recall there's no reason to limit that at the municipal and special election by the legislature. You have really good reason to have consistency in counties and state and federal, but there is no good reason to tell the town of Du Bois or whomever how to conduct their elections.
And if I could go farther, Mr. Chairman, I think this bill would cast aspersions on a lot of activity that boards do where they, for example, select a chairman, for example. That's not really an election in a sense, but recently the city of Lander had to go through the process of picking from the councilman present a new mayor. Because you probably heard our Monty Richardson passed away rather suddenly. And so if a city council wanted to use ranked choice voting to select the new mayor, within the framework of the statute, why wouldn't they be able to do that? I know for a fact that the Democratic Party has used ranked choice voting before. Is it for the presidential, to select presidential people from their caucus? Is that an election? Is that now prohibited? I don't think it's technically an election, but I think this casts an aspersion on all of that. And I just hope we wouldn't do that. It's not authorized in Wyoming for elections, but why would we want to not learn?
So, Mr. Chairman, Since I'd said ironically, there was a lot of conversation about filling a vacancy in the county commissioner's race in my county. And I found it ironic, amusing that in coming up with the 3 people to put forward as potential to the county commissioners, I think there was 8 or 11, they actually put into place what was effectively a ranked choice voting. They did it iteratively. So you had to vote for 3. Your ballot was, to begin with, your ballot was thrown out if you had more than 3 or less than 3. They counted them all up, and there weren't 3 that had 50% of the possible. So they eliminated 1, and we went back, they picked 1, eliminated 1, and of those that were left, we had to pick 2 and only 2 for the remainder. So in effect, the Republican Party of Sheridan County was going through an iteration that exactly mimicked what is done in RCV. But again, there's no purpose in this bill. It's just not necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Marissa Carpio. I work for the Equality State Policy Center. We're an organization that was formed in Wyoming by Wyomingites over 30 years ago, dedicated to fair elections and transparent government. Thank you for your time and allowing me to speak our concerns on this bill today. Wyoming doesn't currently use this method, though other nearby states like Utah have successfully implemented it for their municipal elections. In 2023, which was admittedly before my time with ESPC, our organization worked with the Corporations Committee over an interim to explore instant runoff voting as an optional system for municipalities to partake in Wyoming. Although I wasn't there, I viewed it from the outside in a different position. It was a joint effort over many months in meetings between the House and the Senate, the clerks and localities to think through what this might look what it might look like for voters. Although the bill ultimately failed in the 2023 session with essentially a brand new committee on the House side, I think it's still a conversation that's worth having, or at least allowing the option to have the conversation. Ms. Simmons mentioned that Alaska implemented a ranked choice voting method, and in 2022, after their congressional election, 73% of voters ranked more than one candidate. And according to a post-vote poll, 85% found ranked choice voting simple to use. Outright banning this method of voting that is currently not authorized in Wyoming misses an opportunity to be flexible and respond to the wishes of voters in localities. Thank you. I can stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Ben Williams. I am with Fair Vote Action. We are a national organization that supports the expansion of voter choice throughout the country, and that usually means through the adoption of ranked choice voting. I'm going to zag, though. I think you're expecting a zig here. I'm not going to say what you think I'm going to say. Our reading of Wyoming law right now is that ranked choice voting is already prohibited because ranked choice voting would have to be enabled through an act of the legislature to become used under the government system in the state of Wyoming. So like Ms. Simmons was suggesting, we don't believe that currently any governmental entity within Wyoming could use ranked choice voting right now if they wanted to. I do believe, however, that there is some ambiguity in the construction of this bill as it's currently written. And I've tried to think of a small amendment that would get the support of Mr. Rubino and the bill sponsor and might get through this committee just to clarify that. And what it's about is presidential primaries. So as has been mentioned, the Wyoming Democratic Party has used ranked choice voting in the past in a party-run process to select their delegates that will go to the national convention to select their nominees for president. And currently under Wyoming statute, let me get the citation for you. There is a reference, it's 22-19-102. That sets the rules by which the Secretary of State receives the nominations from the DNC and the RNC for the nominees for president that will be on the ballot. Nothing in Wyoming law currently attempts to regulate how the parties select their own nominee or delegates to go to the party committees. You could do that by creating a presidential primary election in Wyoming, but I don't think that's the intent of this bill either, because there's no fiscal note. And obviously, creating an entirely new election would require additional costs. Thirdly, if you look at the bill, there's a reference to this following line is added. It says, any existing or future ordinance enacted or adopted by a county, municipality, or any other governmental entity that purports to authorize ranked choice voting in violation of this section is void. It doesn't mention political parties. The issue comes down to the definition of election in Title 22. So this is in 22.1.102A13, which says that election, when used without qualifying adjectives, means all elections participated in by the voters of a city, town, county, district, or state. It doesn't specify all voters, it's unclear. So, to avoid any potential reading of this bill to apply to a presidential nominating process, which would be regulating the internal party processes of the Wyoming Republican and the Wyoming Democratic parties, which is something that would come under some constitutional scrutiny from the US Supreme Court. I've thought of a 2-word amendment to this bill that I think would clarify the issue. I don't think it goes as far as Senator Case has been talking about, because it leaves the operation of the bill largely intact. But on page 2, line 2, you would insert the words government administered between the words any and election. And my understanding of that is that meets the intent of the bill as it is. It would still prohibit ranked choice voting in all government elections that go through the municipal clerk process that are overseen by the Secretary of State, but it would not touch the presidential nominating process, which is right now currently the only situation in which ranked choice voting is used for anything in Wyoming. I'm hopeful that that's the kind of amendment that could get the votes on this committee, and with that, I will stand for questions, and thank you for having me.
Questions? Senator Case.
Thank you very much. Mr. Williams, so if I were to, your proposed amendment, in your words, would maybe make this palatable, I suppose? Is that the right word? Or would you just prefer not to have the bill at all?
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Senator Case, obviously it would be the preference of my organization not to have the bill at all. But if you are going to pass this bill, I think with the amendment, it makes clear that the political parties are still free to use this for their own internal processes. It avoids any potential unconstitutional scrutiny. I can just spit out some random case names at you, but I don't think you need them. And this bill, with this amendment, would not really change anything in Wyoming law, because as I've already said, I don't believe that any governmental entity in Wyoming could use ranked choice voting as things stand. By the way, just a separate note, this bill also prohibits a second voting method called approval voting, the way it's written. It doesn't just prohibit ranked choice voting, which is a voting method that my organization does not take a position on. But if you are going to pass this, I think with the amendment, it makes clear that the political parties are free to continue doing what they would choose to do. And if at some date in the future, the state of Wyoming and this legislature would like to create a presidential primary, and that would be the method that the state would use for nominating processes, obviously there would be a cost associated with that. But then this bill would still prohibit ranked choice voting in that system as well. So I'm trying to leave the optionality open for you in the future.
One more thing.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Mr. Williams, that statutory reference you did to the definition of elections, I missed that one. Could you give me that number again?
Of course, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Of course, Senator Case, so that was, here, I'm just slowing down for you. It is 22.1.102A and then 13 XIII, which is the definition of election in Title 22.
So I'm getting confused on this one because, 22.1, I'm sorry, I was in 22.2, sorry.
Oh,
I'll find it. I'm good, thank you.
Curious about one of the statements you made. If we wanted to have a presidential primary, I think every primary I've voted in has had presidential candidates on it. So I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, forgive me if I have a misunderstanding, but my understanding is that the Wyoming Democratic Party uses a party-run process to select its nominees for the Democratic National Convention. And the Republican Party has used various processes in the past. Some of them have been party-run primaries, some of them have been conventions. But I'm not a Wyomingite. I tried to let the Wyomingites speak before I came up here. I would defer to them.
Thank you for clearing that up for me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sometimes I'm a little obtuse.
No worries. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. There's better methods out there to determine the winner of an election than ranked choice voting. With that, I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have.
Questions?
Well, I challenge him on that. What, Mr. Chairman, what is the, what are the better methods? What are the different types of selection methods?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, a runoff election.
Mhm. So, Mr. Chairman, you can mathematically show that it is possible for a person that would get a majority of votes in a subsequent election to not be eligible for a runoff, depending on the rest of the distribution of, and how many candidates. And so runoff isn't perfect. You know, if you have a big field, and you were to say we were to run a whole bunch of different elections, we were to do every possible combination of comparisons of elections, we would find that in the determining election, the person that would get the most votes could have been the person that in a field of, say, 8 candidates, actually was below half of, in the worst part of the field. But in a head-to-head comparison, they do the best, because everybody in their own mind, if you have just 2 candidates facing each other, then that's the way you have to choose, right? Everybody else is already eliminated. And you actually end up with someone that can achieve more than half the votes, when in a runoff, you can just as mathematically get bogged down as a plurality. You actually can if you do the math. And I just challenged it on that. The math is important in all these.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, I don't think there's any perfect way to do this. But with to use an adage, the cream usually rises to the top. So if you had multiple candidates, the 2 people that would get the most votes would typically be the 2 that would go on to the runoff. Mr. Chairman, Senator, I agree that anything mathematically is possible, but my organization stays with, instead of doing a ranked choice, a runoff would be better.
And all I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, is that's an opinion of an organization. It's not a mathematical proof.
Okay, any other questions? Anybody else want to speak from the audience? Do we still have Jackie Doyer online? Let's bring her in. Donna, give me 1 more minute on that.
Mr. Chairman and committee, my name is Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. And I wasn't going to say anything, but I wanted just to clarify one thing for you, or something for you to know, is our election equipment that we currently use is capable of doing this election. We could collect the votes and tabulate the votes. However, the algorithm that needs to be done to determine the ranked choice selections and that type of thing, we don't have that available to us. Currently, for us to be able to do that, we would need to contract with a third-party vendor to get that, excuse me, to get that equipment and that software. Two concerns. Number one, our equipment needs to be EAC certified, and there is not a EAC certified vendor that's providing that currently in the United States. And, excuse me. The second part also is that we would be taking our secure information and putting it into an unsecure environment to be able to do that algorithm. So just so you know what the capability of our equipment is and whether we really could conduct that election at this point without some more help. So.
Okay, well, thank you. Any questions? Can we bring Jackie in now?
Jackie Doyers.
Welcome to Revenue.
Thank you, Chairman McEwen, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on House Bill 165. My name is Jackie Doyer. I'm the Legal Policy Director for the Honest Elections Project Action. We are a nonprofit group dedicated to preserving free and fair elections for all Americans. This bill bans the complicated voting scheme known as ranked choice voting. It would join 11 other states that have already banned ranked choice voting. Recently, in 2024, we've seen this tidal wave of public sentiment against ranked choice voting. In 2024, 70% of Missouri voters approved a constitutional ban on ranked choice voting. And there were 6 states where voters had ranked choice voting on the ballot for their constitutions and all rejected enacting ranked choice voting or approving it for their states. The public consensus is clear that ranked choice voting has no place in American elections. And it's easy to see when you look at how it works and what the implications are, why it is being overwhelmingly rejected. For one, it is corrosive to public trust in elections. No matter how it's branded, Final Five, instant runoff, or simply ranked choice voting, it is a scheme that is aimed at ending the American principle of one person, one vote. Instead, as you've heard, voters are asked to rank candidates by order of preference. The winners are computed through a series of elimination rounds. If no one wins a majority of the first place vote in the first round of tabulation, the candidate with the least amount of first place votes is eliminated. And then if those people who had voted for that candidate had a second choice person on their ballot, then all votes are redistributed to the second choice. And it goes on and on until a majority winner is selected. But this is a majority of the remaining votes. It is not a true majority. It is a manufactured majority because we are removing ballots from the denominator. This makes the voting process more complicated, and enormous effort has to be put into educating the public about how to vote. For example, New York City spent $15 million to teach people how to vote in a ranked choice voting election, and Maine produced a 19-page guide for voters on how to vote. This also takes more time than voters are accustomed to on 2 fronts. One would be on educating themselves on the types of candidates, what their stances are, and also just in terms of how long it takes to vote. A study by MIT found that filling out a ballot takes 12 seconds longer per candidate compared to traditional plurality elections. So if you had a Final Five type of system, this would be 1 full minute extra per race. So if we succeeded with having a ranked choice voting election, replacing federal, state, and local elections with what we traditionally are used to, the time could easily double, risking long lines, voter fatigue, and down ballot races, and potentially deterring people from voting altogether. Tabulating votes is also particularly challenging with ranked choice voting. You cannot begin tabulation until every ballot has been received and processed, meaning we would have delayed results. When you ask for recounts, this only compounds the issue, and questions arise about when the recount would be taking place as to which round of tabulation. This can lead to litigation and further delay finality of election results. Finally, another problem is the complicated black box nature of this type of voting. You've heard today about the type of software that would be necessary to actually run through these rounds of tabulation. But it is possible for tabulation mistakes to go undetected entirely. In Oakland, California, in 2022, the tabulators were programmed in such a manner that they mistakenly eliminated hundreds of votes and certified the wrong winner in a school board contest. That nearly went undetected, and it took months before the actual winner was seated in office. Other issues abound. In 2023, a study by the Hubert Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota concluded that ranked choice voting failed to reduce political polarization, increase diversity among election officials, increase voter turnout, or decrease negative campaigning. In fact, one study of RCV elections in Maine found that negative spending increased significantly, casting doubt on the claim that it actually makes campaigns more civil. Many jurisdictions have tried ranked choice voting only to repeal or walk away from it. For instance, you often heard a lot about the Utah program, where some municipalities were participating in a ranked choice voting pilot. There were 24 cities that were recruited for this, yet over half have withdrawn, citing public confusion and ranked choice voting's failure to deliver on its promises. The push for ranked choice voting, if you look deeper, is not an organic bottom-up movement led by local activists. It is actually a concerted national campaign by a small group of liberal elite mega donors to remake elections across our nation. What you will see is when you look at the push for it across the country that was just rejected in 2024, this is evidenced by how you saw it across the country. Americans want elections with clear rules that deliver clear winners, and ranked choice voting offers neither. I would encourage you to advance House Bill 165 and protect Wyoming's elections. Let's learn from all of the mistakes that other states and localities have already learned from and not bring this to Wyoming. Thank you for considering my testimony.
Any questions? Well, thank you for your testimony. Do we have anybody else who wants to speak? Please, Mr. Secretary.
I appreciate it. I know Mr. Rubino, he always does a great job. I just am very passionate about this. So I'd just like to go on the record, Chuck Gray, Wyoming Secretary of State, in support of House Bill 165, the ranked choice voting prohibition bill. There are, I believe, 6 states that have done this now. Ranked choice voting just has shown time and time again not to work. The ballot exhaustion issue, which I just saw in the last testifier, has been alluded to multiple times. It's not in line with our republic, because if your ballot gets exhausted in the process, it doesn't count. And that's not in line with the principles of our republic. And it just has not worked. There's been tabulation issues. There's been timing issues on this ranked choice voting. And I think the nationwide movement to just get ahead of this and ban it and take a strong stand, make sure there won't be these efforts to do it at municipal levels, which was an effort that was attempted back in 2023, did fail, but came out of committee with a municipal ranked choice voting option. I think getting ahead of this and just flat out banning it is the way to go and take a strong stand. So I'm in full support of House Bill 165. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Questions? We will close public comment and work the bill. What's your pleasure?
Move the bill. Second.
Been moved by Senator Ide, seconded by Senator French. There's a proposed amendment. Does anybody want to carry that? Okay, moving to the bill.
I'll make the motion on the amendment. I mean, I don't want to preclude my friends in the Democratic Party from using this.
Okay. We have a second? It's been moved by Senator Case, seconded by Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, don't you think it'd be a little arrogant if we were to say that this would apply to non-government elections? I mean, we only can rule with elections that are sponsored by the government. So it seems like this is a harmless amendment to the intent of the bill. It would only affect a political party, which we don't really have a lot of jurisdiction over in the first place, except for parties do exist under the Wyoming law. So I'd hope, this would allow them, parties to use this or other entities to use it outside of a government-sponsored election.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Senator Ide.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would it be possible, Mr. Chairman, to have the bringer of the bill or the department or the Secretary's State's office comment on that amendment?
Representative Webb, you are the next contestant.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, I'm not an attorney, and I don't know all the legal ramifications on that, so I would like to defer to either to somebody from the Secretary of State's office concerning their feelings on that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chapter 4 of the Election Code, Title 22, does regulate the major parties. Now, I think it's something we can talk about. I know both parties in different situations often have heartburn with that, but that is in the code. And if they are concerned that that applies to them, I think for them to say that's unprecedented, I would object to a little bit. So I think I'd certainly oppose the amendment, but I understand what they're saying, but I don't think it's unprecedented for us to take, have provisions relating to those parties. It's in Chapter 4 of the code. So we've kind of already crossed that Rubicon. If we want to talk about deleting it, as has been discussed, I think that's an interesting discussion to have in the interim. And there's been talk about that over the years, and we might very well on Friday, when we talk about interim topics and corporations, talk about it. But we regulate the major parties all over Chapter 4. It's the intent of Chapter 4. And I think to take a strong stand on this and say that major party elections are going to be somewhat limited on this, and we're not going to have ranked choice voting on major parties that are pursuant, that are regulated in Chapter 4 of the Election Code. I think that's a policy choice, and one that I would support, us taking a clear stand that we're going to not allow ranked choice voting in those situations. I certainly appreciate the intent of the amendment, but I think I'd oppose it and support the bill. Thank you.
Any other comments on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I fail to see why we would tell either the Republican or the Democratic Party how they should decide their internal affairs and make their selections. That seems kind of against free expression, against the right of parties to organize their affairs. It's, they're a private organization. So I hope we would allow for this exception. I suspect it wouldn't stand up. I mean, there might be a legal challenge about that, I suppose. And Mr. Williams maybe would have more, if we could indulge, if you'd indulge me and allow him to speak again, I'd appreciate it.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Case, I think that it's clear that the state does have the authority to regulate some party procedures, but there is an ample body of language from the U.S. Supreme Court that says that when states attempt to regulate how the parties run their own internal processes, including how they would run a private election or a convention to select delegates to go to another convention, there are freedom of association concerns that the Supreme Court has identified in multiple cases over the years. California Democratic Party v. Jones is one of the most recent ones. The Republican Party was actually also a plaintiff in that lawsuit along with the Democrats. So there is an ample body of litigation. Now, Would this specific language be unconstitutional? It would be up to a court to decide that. But rather than risk the cost of litigation on the taxpayers of the state of Wyoming, I would say adopt the amendment. It still leaves the ban intact for almost every election, including every election that would go through the clerks. I think it meets the intent of the bill, and that's why I offered it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Question on the amendment?
All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
No. The amendment has failed. We're back on the bill.
Just finally speak against the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
We're prospectively prohibiting something that's not permitted now. And it's because we're afraid of it. We don't understand it. We don't even want to take enough time to understand it. And, you know, I just push back. Even Alaska, they're satisfied with what they did. They like it. They think it achieves positive results for them. I agree that it's seems complicated, perhaps overly so, but why would we just flat out prohibit it when it's not even permitted now? It would take a law to allow it to be done now. And so I don't understand why we would prohibit it.
Senator Ide.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll be short and sweet here. Yeah, back to a lot of the conversation, the young lady online, other speakers. I mean, I think it goes against everything this country was founded on too. It's a scheme. It's a manufactured majority, in my opinion. And it's just too complicated. I mean, you hear the testimony on, I mean, even from some of our local county people here that, you know, you need more computer equipment and they can do it, but then you got to train people and hire people to train them. So I think we nip this thing in the bud and head it off the pass. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comment? I think we'll go to the question. Donna, you want to call the roll, please?
Roll call vote on House Bill 165, ranked choice voting prohibition. Senator Case.
No.
Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Ide.
Aye.
Senator Pappas. Chairman McEwen.
Aye.
We have 4 aye and 1 no, Mr. Chairman. Oh, I'm sorry.
You can't.
That would be 3 aye and 2 no.
You're a solid aye.
We done?
I think so. That ends. We'll adjourn this, and it's the last Revenue Committee meeting of the session. Good job, guys. We got through everything.
Are we going to interview the State Board of Equalization candidate? There's a reappointment?
Should.
Can't if you want to.
I want the new